Okay, so welcome. Many thanks for joining us this evening. This is the final Zoom discussion as part of COPnes 26, Totnes Town and Region's parallel event to COP in Glasgow. But because of the phenomenal interest across the region and beyond, there are more events coming up. Further details will be at the end. These events have been planned to enable informed, transparent and open debate on aspects of the environmental crisis. There will be a copy of the discussion available after the event, so you can revisit, or those who couldn't attend can view at a time of their own choosing. You should be automatically muted. Please also ensure your video is off to conserve bandwidth. You will be able to use the chat during the session. Please feel free to share thoughts, articles, news reports, or call attention to any other useful sources you would like to share. The chat will be saved, and you will also be able to post questions for the panel into the chat. Please enter in the chat exactly who you are addressing your question to in the first place, and I can also pose the question in the most effective way when the time is appropriate. We will get through as many chat questions as possible in the time allowed. If you cannot hear one of the panelists, please also let us know via the chat so we can fix the problem. We'll be monitoring the chat throughout, so if there are any technical issues, please let us know straight away. We'd like to welcome and thank our panelists because they've all agreed to participate in the spirit of open and informed discussion, and we are extremely grateful for their participation. So on this discussion panel tonight, and I'm going to ask the panelists to please wave when I mention your name. We've got Dr. Peter Evans. We have Matt Mander, Chief Officer, Inshore Fisheries and Conservation Authority. We've got Anthony Mangnall, MP for Totnes and South Devon. We've got Mike Poolstone, marine naturalist and ocean rebellion activist. I'll say Dr. Peter Evans, your title, sorry, School of Ocean Sciences, Bangor University, very important to get that in. Geeta Singh Watson, ethical publican, the Bull Inn Totnes. And we've got Martin Ewell, Water Dance and the Western Fish Producers Organisation. I'm really hoping that this evening we might also get the chance to speak with a fisherman, Sean Michael Beck. He's at sea, but maybe the tech might work and we might be able to speak with him at some point in this discussion, which would be exciting. The way we like to do things in COPnes Talks is to give each panelist 2 minutes to outline who they are, what they do, and their position and angle of interest on the discussion topic. So I'd like to start with Dr. Peter Evans, please, if you could outline who you are, what you do, and your angle of interest in this discussion topic. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, so my name's Peter Evans, as Jim's just said, and I'm the director of the Sea-Watch Foundation, which is a national monitoring research charity that is concerned with particularly monitoring marine mammals and birds. And I've worked on those for several decades, in fact, really. So that's my main interest as a zoologist, but particularly in the marine environment.
Thank you. Matt Mander, could you introduce yourself to everybody, please?
Yeah, good evening, everybody. My name is Matt Mander. I'm the Chief Officer at Devon and Severn Inshore Fisheries and Conservation Authority. I think we've got one of the longest emails, so if you want to contact us with when you're typing. So we're one of 10 such organisations that have which is a statutory body. Our area covers from all of Devon waters out to 6 miles, Somerset, and all the way up to Severn Estuary. So we're the biggest district. Our duties are set out in the Marine and Coastal Access Act. And they are pretty challenging duties, and because we need to try and balance, as the duties set out, between the exploitation of sea fisheries resources, with balancing that against the environmental impact of such activities. And we also recognise our duty to balance the needs of all fishers, so that includes recreational and commercial operations. And we try to do that through engagement and participation in our management. So it's really trying to demonstrate localism at its best. It's challenging, we don't get it always right, but tonight I'm sort of hoping to use this as a way of positively engaging with an audience that we might not come across very often.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you. Anthony, could you introduce yourself, please?
Good evening, I'm Anthony Magnell. I'm the Member of Parliament for Totnes in South Devon, and obviously with one of the most vibrant coastal communities in the country and the most valuable fishing port in England. It is essential for me to not only be able to listen, but also to speak on the experience that I've had working alongside the fishing sector. And as many of you will know, I was out at sea recently with one of the water dance vessels to understand a little bit more about what's going on and how our trawlers operate. So it's a pleasure to be here and very interested to hear where the discussion goes.
Thank you, Anthony. Mike, could you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, hello everyone. Good evening. Yeah, my name is Mike Polliston. First thing I'm going to say is I am not a scientist, but I am a key marine naturalist. I go out onto the shores recording the local marine life. I actually co-started a marine interest association, the Shores of South Devon, which is thriving. I'm part of the marine biology community by the MBA in Plymouth. And essentially, I've had a lifelong fascination with fish ever since going to the Marine Biological Aquarium when I was about 10 years of age. So that's like, in the 60s, and I'm marveling at the specimens that I saw. So yeah, fish is always kind of an interest to me. Obviously, particularly at the moment, there is a lot of concerns about fish stocks and generally the marine ecosystems. So therefore, I have become a Ocean Rebellion activist. Ocean Rebellion, as you may know, is a kind of sister grouping from Extinction Rebellion, and which I'm also active in. Yeah, I have a particular area of interest in this topic tonight, actually. So I'm kind of really looking forward to hearing what other people have got to say. Can I just say very quickly, just one thing? I mentioned already the MBA, but the MBA was actually founded in 1883, and the current building in Plymouth was built in 1888 as a marine laboratory. And this came about in 1866 when a Royal Commission on Sea Fisheries, headed by Professor Thomas Huxley, became kind of famous, infamous, responded to reported concerns of overexploitation of fish stocks around the UK. So this is back in 1866. Huxley actually then went on to address a fisheries convention in London a couple of years later. He stated very clearly that it was just not possible to overexploit certain species of fish, i.e. cod, herring and mackerel, using the current fishing methods. So he was actually really kind of proved to be wrong soon afterwards by Sir Ray Lancaster, who did groundbreaking work on fisheries management and research. And it was pretty evident that actually there was, even back then, there was actually concerns about fishing stocks. And so 150 years later, we have this scenario where there are concerns about stocks of cod, herring and mackerel. So I just thought I'd give a bit of historical kind of context to that. Maybe things haven't changed. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Geeti, could you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, I'm Geeti Singh Watson. I'm a publican and restaurateur. And I opened my first organic pub in London 30 years ago. And actually, the whole point of the business was to be as values driven as possible and to demonstrate to people that you could have your delicious meal in fabulous settings while having as minimal impact on the environment as possible, and in circumstances a positive effect on the environment. And fish is one of the ways that you can, actually. If we manage fish stocks well and fish and create marine reserves, we can actually have positive effect on the oceans. I started organic, that was easy, and recycling and composting and all the other values and recycled furniture was simple. Fish was phenomenally hard. I mean, it was just impossible, and still is impossible, to get straight answers out of the fish wholesalers about how, where their fish is caught. So having gone through really complex fish procurement policies that I created, that were the first one, I had the first restaurant fish procurement policy to be approved by the Marine Conservation Society. And I was the first restaurant in Britain, actually, along with a couple of others, we grouped together to be approved by the Marine Stewardship Council. That we felt these were really straightforward steps that would mean that we could serve sustainably caught fish whenever we wanted to. Actually, it turned out the suppliers were incapable of doing it. So now I buy directly off fishers only. I don't go through supply chains, and that works very well. What it does mean is we don't always have fish, because real sustainable fishers can't go out when there are storms at sea. And that's it's a good thing. You know, that's another form of marine reserve. So the whole emphasis in our restaurant is as ethical and sustainably sourced food that we can buy, and the fish being an occasional dish.
Thank you, Geeti, for that. And Martin, could you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, good evening, everyone. Lovely to be here, and already some really interesting points made by others. I've definitely got something in common with Mike. I'm fish obsessed, fish geek. I grew up in Cornwall, trained as a marine biologist, and worked in marine regulation for 10 years. So with the Environment Agency and the Marine Management Organization in things like licensing, marine activities, marine spatial planning, and fisheries regulation. And I joined Waterdance, which is a Southwest-based family-owned fishing business, in 2019. Principally to work on improving sustainability and compliance, and making sure it's the most professional and sustainable fishing company out there. That's our vision. So delighted to be involved. I live in East Devon, and main interests are nature conservation, interested in sustainability and food systems.
Terrific. Thank you, Martin. So Martin, the fishing community are really hardworking people who deserve to make a good living from the sea. Many will be out there right now in all kinds of weather doing an important and sometimes dangerous job. It's become clear how radically practices on land, from farming to tree planting, energy production to transport, are going to need to change dramatically over the next 10 years. So what support and guidance has the fishing industry had from government in the changes that will similarly be necessary and urgent at sea?
Yeah, so I think fishing is a really interesting sector because it's very traditional. It's the original maritime activity, and increasingly we in the fishing communities are having to get used to being one of many players. So we hear the terms blue put in front of anything you can imagine, be it blue growth, blue jobs, blue carbon, blue economy, and that's quite exciting. Renewable energy is expanding rapidly at sea, and ultimately that is a good thing and it's needed. But in terms of the fishing industry, how we're adapting in terms of competition for space. So trying to interact as best we can with government around marine spatial planning and ensuring everything that needs to happen in the sea as we look beyond land for our resources that we need to live is accommodated, but protecting the fishing communities and their key fishing grounds. And I think it will be absolutely key that the right incentives come from government to stimulate the fishing industry to adapt and change. So think of your car. You might renew it every 10 years, but a fishing boat, generally you would only renew every 30 to 40 years. So it's going to be absolutely crucial that we adapt the fleet which is currently active, because it's going to be too late in terms of climate targets just to think we can replace vessels rapidly. So we're looking and driving at things like gear adaptations, investment in the fleet. And we do think we will need some public support, but there's a lot we're doing as a cooperative of fishermen with the Western Fish Producers Organisation. So, for example, we recently trialled a lighter beam trawl gear, which reduced our fuel use by 20%. So that's quite a telling change and something we'd like to build on.
But in terms of what your the guidance and the support that you're being given right now, do you know what those adaptations are that you will need to put in place within the next 10 years? Have you got a clear roadmap?
Well, no, is the honest answer. I think I was just having a look at some of the outputs of COP, and there isn't a COP agreement yet, so hopefully there will be by the end of the night. But I think we are conscious very much of, from a bottom-up perspective, what we need to do. So we need to respect marine protected areas, encourage regeneration of fish stocks. Currently, around 2/3 of the fish stocks in the European zone are sustainably exploited. That leaves a third which are not, which is far too many. So what we would like to see is significant government investment in improving the biological information on those stocks, which are so-called data limited stocks. We don't really know how much is out there, and therefore we don't know whether the exploitation is sustainable. That's a poor position to be in as a fishing business, and indeed socially and environmentally. So we would be looking for government investment and encouragement, but also to build on the ideas that we have and can implement with a little bit of guidance. It's very much in our interest to reduce fuel consumption. It's approximately 25% of a trawler's gross earnings goes directly on fuel at the current fuel prices. So there's every incentive, aside from the ethical incentive to reduce carbon intensity of fishing, there's a huge incentive economically as well. So it's a win-win if we can push at some of these solutions.
Yeah, so thank you for that, Martin, because obviously we're very lucky we've got Matt Mander here from the Inshore Fisheries and Conservation Authority. And Matt, I'm really interested to hear, I mean, has enough attention been paid to inshore fisheries and conservation in terms of making sure that the stocks and the biodiversity is actually sustainable?
Simple answer is no. It's quite interesting that it's very much a topic of conversation with what's going on in Glasgow, but quite clearly, I would say, certainly from Devon and Severn's point of view, that we are always struggling for funding, although we do see ourselves as playing a really important part in sort of delivering the government's view that's set out in the Fisheries Act for world-class fisheries. I think we're a long way away from that. And if we're really serious about it, and it goes through all of these commitments, that you've really got to put money into it, proper money to resource it in such a way. And I accept there's many challenges out there in terms of public money, because our funding comes from the local authorities. Around 60% of our funding comes from local authorities, including Devon County Council, Torbay and Plymouth. And then 40% comes from central government. And we're, depending on how much resource we get, is how much work we do. We're focused on the balancing exploitation with marine conservation. So our focus is on ensuring that the areas that are designated as protected areas are actually protected. There's a big difference between designating these sites and actually ensuring that they're protected, because they do get there are many incursions into those areas, because, as you'd expect, when you protect a site, the fish populations are generally better in there. So unfortunately, that does become more of an incentive to fish illegally in those areas. And we have a number of cases ongoing at the moment, which is exactly that, with incursions. So I think one of the things that we must get clear, and it's a bit like with the overall commitment from Glasgow, it's only paper at the moment. You actually have to deliver it, and there's a big difference. As for the conversation that we started with and the question you asked Martin, I think this is again where it becomes so much more difficult, because one of the things that we see in the industry is this drive towards more efficient capture of fish. And that's likely to be on bigger, more efficient vessels. Whereas one of the key things that this country's got, which isn't replicated in many other countries is that it's got a really strong inshore fleet. 80% of the vessels that currently fish are below 10 meters in length. So there's a lot of small boats. And if you looked at strictly the sort of carbon footprint compared to the capture, it's not very efficient, but it's so much more than that in terms of what it brings to the community, and that socioeconomic challenge that we're faced with in our management. And it's a really interesting, and that's why I've been in it for so long, is that it's always a challenge to try to get the right balance. There's definitely a need for the likes of water dances of this world. They are at the top end, in terms of the size of the vessels and their operation. And then you've also got the smaller vessels, which Geeti said that she was sourcing from. I think by just getting from Martin saying about the sustainable side of it, I think there's ways of managing all these different activities in such a way that they can deliver sustainability. It's just putting the right vessels and the right activity in the right places. And so I think we can work on that basis, but it is a challenge when we're an organization of 11 people, 4 enforcement officers. So, for that size district, we try to do our best. And one of the things that has driven, and we might get onto the subject later on, but we innovate all the time. And one of the things that is a culture within our organization is that we look to try and do things differently, because there is potential, huge potential in doing things better and differently. And technology is one of those things that we can use not only to drive down sort of carbon usage, but also just the way that we manage fisheries using technology. So maybe we'll explore that later in the evening.
Great. We will, Matt. We'll unpack a lot of this. The chat is very active. Lots of talk about beam trawling, and does it have the same emissions as all aviation? We'll be looking at that, and we'll also, there's a really interesting question around fish farming. But we'll just move on. I just want to. We've unpacked this idea that looking after our fish stocks is absolutely crucial. Having a strong fishing industry is a really important thing for all of us. But we lack that data, and we seem to be lacking that top level strategy and policy. Just before we can move to you, Anthony, to talk about policy and strategy, Peter, could you just set the context around, well, what role do the oceans play in this climate crisis? Because we're talking about biodiversity. Has that got anything to do with climate? Has that got anything to do with what's really being discussed up at COP?
Yes, absolutely it does. And I mean, to take the example of what I work on particularly, which are sort of whales and dolphins there, they are one of the most important contributors to the removal of carbon dioxide in the carbon cycle. So, I mean, the ocean is a very important part of the Earth's carbon cycle, as it helps with this carbon sequestration that we see. That's the removal of carbon dioxide from the Earth's atmosphere, which is what's a major problem for climate change. It holds 50 times more carbon dioxide than in the atmosphere itself. So that shows you really how important it is. And important carbon sinks that will sort of store carbon are planktonic plants, phytoplankton, seagrass beds, mangrove forests in the tropics, and whales. And it's only actually recently that we've really understood better how important whales are for this. And these can lock away carbon for many hundreds of years, even thousands of years. So they're a really important source there. Carbon-filled plankton, planktonic plants, eaten then by zooplankton. And then when these are eaten by whales, and those whales die and sink to the seabed, the carbon becomes stored for these very long periods of time. And whales are capable of building up large amounts of carbon stores, millions of tons a year within their bodies over their lifetime. This is really quite a considerable amount. Carbon stored in this way is often referred to as blue carbon, as was mentioned earlier, since they effectively immobilize that carbon from the cycle. Whales also increase the amount of plankton production, which stores 40% of all carbon produced. And it generates, 37 billion tons of carbon dioxide a year is then taken out of that. That's 4 times the carbon storage of the Amazon rainforest, for example. So although we talk a lot about the need, and there is certainly a need to stop deforestation, there's also an enormous need to be careful for what's happening in the oceans there, besides any sort of conservation needs that there are for maintaining biodiversity. A recent study published actually just a few days ago in Nature showed that previous studies had really underestimated the amount of consumption of prey that baleen whales made. That's like blue whales, fin whales, and so on, by about 3-fold or more in certain ecosystems. And of course, we over-exploited a lot of these whales in past centuries, particularly the last century. And in areas like the Southern Ocean, we reduced it, by say 100-fold. And that meant that actually that had a major impact on the carbon cycle and how much carbon dioxide was being absorbed and then sort of immobilized in the seabed. Now, if those populations can recover, that will then work to our advantage in terms of climate change.
Well, thank you, Peter. That was really, really in-depth and really fascinating upsum about where we're at with the oceans. Anthony, I believe that the pillar 1 of the seafood and fisheries funding was all to do with innovation in sustainability. And, good governance and effective strategy is to have an impact assessment of spending. Otherwise, it just becomes another form of subsidy by another name. What impact assessment has been done around this first pillar, specifically for innovation in sustainability? I mean, what, for example, are the headline innovations to come out of pillar 1 funding in Brixham and the wider area?
I mean, that's a good question, and you're probably better off asking people who are actually in the industry as to what those specific technologies are. I mean, Pillar 1 has only just been launched of the £100 million that's been announced by the government. And of course, that money is designed to help and support the industry to innovate, to come through with new technologies. But if I may, I just want to come back and bring in some of the points and the questions that were raised earlier, because the Fisheries Act that passed in 2020 does outline a number of the objectives, which are about making sure that we tackle climate change through fishing, that it's sustainable, that it's precautionary, that it's got scientific evidence behind it, that we address bycatches, and that actually the Environment Bill that passed just on Tuesday, because it went into royal assent after much controversy, but also much debate, and rightly so, because we now have a mechanism to actually hold water companies to account, means that we are taking the steps that are going to actually allow us to address the pollution and the difficulties that we're facing in our waters, because I know that's come up in the questions.
But is that really the case, though, Anthony? Because it is, the reason that went back to debate was because there was an uproar. It wasn't because that there was a strategy behind it.
I'm afraid, actually, I'm afraid you're wrong there. It went back to debate because debates go on back and forwards 3 times in each house and into committee stage, where they are continually amended. The Duke of Wellington's amendment didn't work, and therefore it's now got a task force, a set out agenda and a timeline for when the water companies have to respond to make sure that we can actually address an issue that every government prior to this has failed to address. So, I'm pleased that we've got an environment bill that's in place that is actually going to make a big impact on our waters and ensure that not just our inshore fleet, but our coastal waters as a whole are going to be more biodiverse and allowed to have more areas of protection. I'm particularly supportive of the Benyon Review, which offers the opportunity for more highly protected marine areas, which gives us a chance to cultivate that biodiversity, to cultivate that growth in species.
So was the Benyon Review an impact assessment from the Pillar 1 funding?
No, the Benyon Review was an independent review launched by Richard Benyon when he left DEFRA, and has now been published. So he is going to be and has a set timetable right now to produce more highly protected marine areas. There are pilot zones already that are running.
How many pilot zones?
I can tell you off the top of, I can't tell you off the top of my head. I have a list here of them, if you give me 1 second. But so I think there's one at the moment, there are 4, sorry, around Dogger Bank, Inner Dowsing, South Dorset and the Canyons Marine Conservation Zones.
Because the briefing report did state that the absolute minimum pilot site should be 5.
Okay, I mean, so we're getting round to it. I mean, as I say, he has to designate a number of pilots in 2022 in the English waters. So he's still got time.
Well, that's one thing we don't have, is it? And,
Well,
and
I
that's
mean,
become
all of
very
this
clear
stuff
from
takes time.
COP that
Well,
we
I know,
don't have time.
But this is just the thing, isn't it? You know, it's taken 60 years for anyone to even tackle an environment bill or a fisheries act, and we've just gone and done that. So, you know, the point is the steps are being taken. Not everything is going to happen immediately, but I'm quite positive about the direction of travel in which we're going in.
So, Mike, I'd like to turn to you. With the failure of COP, are we acting fast
not
enough
a
in
failure.
protecting
Sorry,
our
Jim, it's
marine
not a failure.
ecosystems?
One-sided.
Sorry, Jim. Carry on with the question.
Yeah. With the failure of COP, are we acting fast enough to protect our marine ecosystems?
Absolutely not, in any shape or form. What I would bring you back to actually is it was last Friday, which was Oceans Day at COP26, and the legendary marine biologist and oceanographer Dr. Sylvia Earle spoke, and she gave an interview that's a 14-minute interview on YouTube, which I recommend anybody here on this panel and anybody listening tonight to listen to. She came up with some fantastic quotes, which I jotted 1 or 2 down, having watched it a couple of times. I mean, what she's saying is we're running out of time, and she is very clear that organised fishing, industrial fishing on the high seas, which actually essentially is unregulated, because once you're at the high seas, you know, there is nothing really to kind of say what you can and can't do. So you see, what she's saying is that we all need to think about the oceans in a different way, and she came with the great lines, and she said, collectively we have viewed the ocean as free goods. And you know, it's pretty obvious to many groups around the world who are interested in ocean ecology, and to many scientists, that we are, as she said, what we're doing in terms of the ocean right now is extracting wildlife on a mega scale. I think in 2020, Greenpeace recorded 20 different foreign-owned super trawlers operating around the UK. Super trawler definition being a ship, a boat of over 100 meters length. But you know, they actually have a pelagic net a mile long, some of these ships, and they are scooping up lots of pelagic species like blue whiting, boarfish, and all kinds of stuff that then gets processed into pellets, gets fed to farm animals, all the rest of it, chicken farms. I mean, this is just madness. So, and she's saying basically we still have this attitude that it's out there, so we go and catch it. You know, and actually, you go back in time, you know, the Newfoundland cod banks were at one time thought to be inexhaustible, but they were fished out. I mean, essentially, they were fished out. And right at this moment, you know, the EU has actually banned cod fishing in the North Sea, the northern part of the North Sea. And why is that? Because it's been overfished to the point that there is no viable reproductive biomass. So the cod are not able to actually reproduce quick enough to build up a suitable biomass again. But again, it comes back to actually viewing the oceans in a different way. I mean, you know, as she said again, sorry if I keep quoting her, but she is so influential. You know, she said back in the day, you know, we used to go and kill whales, we killed penguins, you know, we killed lots of seals, you know, and those attitudes towards those species have changed. We are as a race, you know, human race, much more protective about these these animals. But what she's saying is, and I utterly agree, is that we still haven't changed our attitudes about fish. And we still view fish as a resource, as a stock. But in actual fact, fish are very, very much, which is pretty obvious in a way, they are very much a central part of the marine ecosystems. Oh, clearly.
Okay.
And what's happening right now is we are taking out the top predators. Sharks are being killed at an unprecedented rate because of bycatch or overfishing specifically for those species. And also, I mean, just to say, as she pointed out also, right now we are now exploiting the bottom of the trophic levels. So we've got krill. So krill fishing now has become utterly industrialized, and you've got huge fleets of huge ships in the pristine waters of the Antarctic, the Southern Ocean, Indian Ocean, catching krill. Now, krill actually is one of the biggest biomass on the planet. Okay, but at one point, so was bison. Bison roamed the plains of America. They were thought to be inexhaustible. They were actually taken out to just a few individuals now. And going back to Huxley, when he thought, there's so many fish out there, keep fishing the way we do, we'll never exhaust it. But of course, technology has moved on to the point it is now incredibly efficient.
Mike, I'd like to pause you in a second, please. Yeah, because
okay,
that's a really good point. I'd like to move to Martin, because actually,
sure.
It's not in Martin's interest to have plummeting biodiversity and plummeting stocks. So Martin, what are the methods of fishing that are being utilised from places like Brixham, and how would you rank them in terms of sustainability? And how they affect the different fish stocks and biodiversity.
Yeah, so we're quite blessed in the southwest with incredibly rich fishing waters and a very diverse fleet of vessels that exploit those fish. So I suppose the pinnacle of sustainability, i.e. low carbon, minimal or no seabed contact, would be something like Cornish sardines. So a boat can leave the harbour at 6 p.m, fish for the night, come in with a significant quantity of fish, which is MSC accredited, no seabed habitat impact. It's an oily fish, very, very healthy, very low food miles. So something like a Cornish sardine would probably be the absolute best, I would say. And then I would say you've probably got a scale then, which moves away from that. So things like potting, which is another key activity in the southwest for crabs, lobsters, common prawns around Lyme Bay, whelks. That's a relatively low impact method in that you don't have a mobile fishing gear moving across the seabed. So that would probably rank in the next level, I would say. And then undoubtedly trawling and mobile fishing does have more impact. And the key challenge there is to minimize that impact and use technology, use global positioning to minimize that impact as much as possible. So avoid high carbon habitats like kelp forests, which is no good to trawl over because kelp has got to attach to something solid like a rock structure. Avoid seagrass beds, they tend to be further inshore, and our vessels are all operating outside 12 nautical miles. And focus in on those highly mobile habitats that are mobile by nature, so sandy substrates that are disturbed in storms, for example, or by the action of large creatures like seals. So I would say you've probably got a scale roughly summarized there.
In terms of the method, very briefly, Martin, the method of catching. So obviously we live in an industrial age, there's different types of net and passive gear and active gear. What, your stuff, what is the most sustainable and creates the least amount of bycatch and is really finely targeted, and which is the least sustainable in terms of expense and in terms of bycatch and in terms of damage?
I think you can look at it in terms of different criteria of sustainability. So let's not confuse economic and social sides, but even just environmentally, you've got the impact of operating the fleet, so the carbon intensity of the operation of the vessel. You've got the fishing method and, for example, contact with the seabed, bycatch of sensitive species, and then you've got the stock itself. So are you only taking as much stock as can be naturally replenished, i.e. it's long term, it's sustainable. So taking all of those things into account, I think most fish caught locally here in the southwest would certainly have a lower carbon impact than something like red meat. You would hope so. In fact, there were 100 tons of fish landed at Brixham Fish Market this morning, and the Scientific, Technical and Economic Committee for Fisheries that reports to the European Commission estimates that for 100 tons of fish wild capture, you produce 170 tons of carbon. And for 100 tons of beef, you produce 30,000 tons of carbon, so more than 2 orders of magnitude higher. So it's a relatively good choice to eat fish, but yes, within that, I think Geeti mentioned about complexity. Fishing and the supply chains are very complex, and as we're purely a fishing company, we don't process fish, and perhaps one of the frustrations we sometimes feel is getting that message through to consumers. But I would probably refer back to my previous 3 tiers: your Cornish sardines, your potting,
Okay.
and then
Okay. Thank you, Martin. Because we'll come back to the methods in a second. Geeti, as a publican, does sustainability actually matter? I mean, it's a word that's bandied around. Does it actually count in terms of reality?
So how many menus do you look at, and how many products in supermarkets do you look at that have the word sustainable on them, that have the word sustainably caught fish, and I seem to remember in 2006 the European Union made it law that you had to state how fish was caught on packets, and the way that people get around that is to just list all the methods that this fish might have been caught. But the point is, people want to know. That's why restaurants say our fish is sustainably caught off Brixham Market, which is just a blanket nothing, because that doesn't relate. That's just, people assume that because it comes from Brixham Market is sustainably caught, but of course it's not. If they're beam trawlers, it absolutely isn't. But every restaurant will say it, and every product will talk about their sustainability, because the consumer wants it. The food citizens want to know. It's really important to people. But we haven't got the information, we haven't got the supply chains. It is horrifyingly frustrating.
So thank you, Geeti. So Matt, beam trawling, that's come up very clearly there. How does a beam trawl work, and what kind of catch does it catch, and what does it do to the seabed?
Can I just, before Matt speaks, say one more thing?
Absolutely.
I have an issue with what Martin said about the amount of carbon that's released from beam trawlers, because it as far as I understand, it's much, much higher than you said, and it must depend entirely on the type of trawling that's happening. I mean, when you're dragging a massive net behind you or beam trawling, it uses phenomenal amounts of fuel, and by the time the fish has been landed and filleted, I can't remember the figures. I think I've got it written down somewhere. I mean, I think we're talking 6 to 15 kilos of CO2 per fish caught, per kilo of fish caught. I mean, really horrific. It's really shocking, much, much worse than beef. And of course, in exactly the same way, it depends how your beef is produced. In exactly the same way, it depends how your fish is caught. So you can't make simple blanket statements like that comparing fish to beef. It's really dubious.
Thank you, Geeti. I want to throw to Matt, and then I do want to get to Anthony, because he's been shaking his head during that, and also to talk to Peter to get get some science around that. Matt, how does a beam trawl work?
Okay, well, it's normally they've got 2 nets that are on beams, right? So they're connected to a beam and they're put to the bottom. So they're called demersal trawls because they're on the ground and they're towed along for a period of time. And species thereafter, the head rope will be higher or lower. The mesh size will be different sizes. But generally, they're after any of the species that are in that feed on the bottom. Fish, that's what we place, and soles are caught through that method. One of the things I may, if I could be cheeky, Jim, is I've seen some brilliant questions in there, but one of the key ones that I saw was around the marine protected areas and how beam trawlers can still go in there. This is a fact that in our area, there's 40% of our inside inshore district of 0 to 6 miles in Devon and Somerset and Severn. 40% of that is prohibited to demersal trawl gears. So that's your scallop dredges. We haven't mentioned them yet.
No.
Scallop dredges, all the beam trawls, any of that demersal activity is removed. And I think, again, I go back to what Anthony said about, this sort of message grabbing of highly protected marine areas. Then at this moment in time, they're highly designated marine areas. You need the likes of the IFCA and the Marine Management Organisation to actually protect these sites. They don't get protected just by designation. And that's one of the things that we are really keen to deliver, because we see the value of protected sites, but that takes a lot of work. And I would say that generally the industry also sees the value of these, but like within all walks of life, there is a element of the sector that will unfortunately look at today and tomorrow's benefits, and will incur it, will go into those areas. And if they took the water away, I think that's one of the biggest problems that we get to energize the general public in terms of understanding the impact. Take the water away and you actually saw some of the destruction that's caused to these reef areas or these areas that are vulnerable to that sort of interaction, then there would be much greater anger and frustration. I mean, it was shown when the pollution incident was able to be demonstrated visually what was going on. The same thing would happen if the public understood what the impact was from the damage that's caused by this small part of the fishing industry. And the one thing that I would say that has really helped start to change things around is that we now have the benefit of the environmental sentencing guidelines. It was very much focused on big business polluters, but it's just as applicable and is now applied to all fisheries cases that involve that sort of damage to the environment. And I think that again is a step towards it, but we're a long way from delivering what we need to in terms of sustainability. But I would say, from my understanding of, and I know there's a lot of conversation about carbon footprint now and how this the beam trawlers and any interaction with the seabed releases carbon, that's trapped there. That at this stage, I'm still of the opinion that there's still opportunities for all these activities to take place, but we just need to make sure that they're managed correctly. And otherwise, again, like our role is to balance. I think we can balance it, but what is really important, I think today's a really good example of it, is that we need to be much better informed about it so we can make decisions. I've seen some things in the chat that I don't agree with. There's things that I don't know and I need to know more about. And I think that's just an example of, even for me that's been in this role, that there is still areas that I need to learn more about. And when we come together as a collective like this, I'm learning from today's sort of discussions. And I think that's the way that we go forward, is that we have an open discussion, we challenge each other properly, and then we go away, and that may over time help us come to a better position and understanding of what's needed, and then collectively deliver it.
Thank you, Matt. I think that's a really good summary of what we're trying to achieve, because this is about informed discussion, and this is about listening to each other and moving forward. Anthony's just about to pop. Peter, I will come to you after Anthony, because I do want to get that scientific overview. But first of all, Anthony, four pilot sites, MPAs, marine protected areas or highly protected areas. The Benyon Review says 5 at the very least. What can we do? How can we act faster?
Well, I mean, again, as I said last time, the whole point is that it runs until 2022. So that's when they've got to produce these areas. I mean, actually, I'm really interested in the stuff that Matt was saying about IFCA. I've met with Matt about this on one occasion, and we'll be doing so again, because IFCA does need to be better funded. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind. If we want this to work and we want these policies to really make the impact that they're designed to have and to have the outcomes we want, then we've got to go in that direction. But I just wanted to actually also, and I'll come back to your points in a second, which is the 2 points around supply chains and labelling. I couldn't agree more with Mrs. Singh-Watson's point about the supply chains, because there's clearly an issue around what we do and how we supply locally, and how we create and put food in from the local market into local offices, schools, supermarkets, all of this stuff. And it just isn't there at the moment. And we need to do far better at that. And there is set to be a procurement bill coming forward next year that is looking to tackle this. And Victoria Prentice is already working to see how she can try and improve it. But I know firsthand from people like Henry Dimbleby, who set up an app to try and actually rectify this issue, that it is incredibly complicated. And as for the point on labelling, I also couldn't agree more about how difficult it is, because when you look at the labelling on any package in any supermarket, it's so complex and so difficult to be able to actually get to grips with what's in your food, let alone how it's been caught or how it's been reared or how it's been slaughtered. It's just a nightmare. And when I interviewed someone the other day about this, because I sit on the trade committee, the International Trade Committee, they said the single most effective thing about whether or not people buy things or not is whether or not it has the Union Jack on it. It's not what's in the wording, it's just the British flag, which decides whether or not someone buys something from home or abroad. So these are two enormous issues that we have to focus on and try and tackle. But you're right about these conservation areas. They are a massive opportunity for us. We can do clever things with them. I think the Benyon Review is really quite bold in what it's trying to do. And I think we go back to the point that you raised with Martin, which is that fishermen understand and recognize the fact that they don't want to overfish their waters because they want their industry to be there in future years. We've got to find that balance. We've got to use new technology that is coming forward. And part of the funding that's been put forward by DEFRA already is a sign of the commitment to do it. But it is making progress. And, I think, again, the attitude and the approach of consumers around farming has already had a huge impact. The fact that we're talking about things like regenerative agriculture more and more and more is a fantastic thing, but we need to also do the same with fish. So much of this is led by the consumers. So how do we provide the education, the insight, the information for people to have a realistic idea about what's going on in our coastal waters?
Great, thank you. Sorry, Katie, you go, yeah.
Okay, it's not up to the consumer, the food citizens, the citizens of this country to make the decisions on how fish is caught, what the legislation around it. That's the government's job. The government's job is to absolutely protect our stocks and our waters from pollution and to manage
what we've done in the Environment Bill, which is what we've done in the Environment Bill and the Fisheries Bill. But the consumer still has the right to go into the supermarket and choose what they buy. And what you've seen in farming is people taking a real step towards wanting better quality meat. We've seen this over COVID. So the consumer has a huge role to play in this. I didn't say it's the only role. That's why the government's passed the Environment Bill and the Fisheries Act. But it plays a massive role in deciding what we do and how we
But you are asking food citizens to become experts on fishing. And as a restaurateur who has spent my entire life trying to get my head around methods, stock levels, it's really, really an impossible ask. It's a governmental issue. It is a legislative issue that should be protecting our food stocks and informing food citizens, not asking them to make the decisions. Because when we have left this market of our environment in the hands of food citizens, consumers, who are just at the mercy of the marketing industry, It has led to this disaster. So it is no longer our fault, actually. It is the
We're
government.
not blaming anyone, and it's not the government's fault either at all. It's completely ridiculous to go down
your
that.
hands. You're in charge.
Which is why the Environment Bill and why the Environment Act and Fisheries Act have been passed, which do more than any other government has
diluted beyond an environmental bill. I'm sorry, I'm not.
Well, I disagree with you, unsurprisingly, but I completely disagree with you on that. And frankly, it is in the consumer's choice to push the way in which people do things. And it's madness to think not, because otherwise that half the organic market, half the regenerative agricultural side of things has been pushed by consumers wanting a better quality of meat, of food, of how it's produced, of how it impacts the land. We know that plays
a market for regenerative agricultural produce. I don't think that even exists at the moment.
Well,
and
I do, actually.
Yes, we the people have driven the organic market with very little support from government. But that demonstrates the desire for a change. And you should be really excited by that and embracing it rather than blocking it, which is what happens. And the House of Lords have criticised your environment bill over and over again and thrown it back for challenge, and you've overridden it. And you've overridden environmental groups challenging exactly what you're saying. It has been diluted into a monetary environmental bill for your benefit, not for the planet or for the oceans.
I feel that this is just coming into party politics here, but the Duke of Wellington has accepted the new amendments.
If we're talking party politics, let's move on. Okay, we're going to move to Matt.
The Duke of Wellington has accepted the new amendment in the environment.
We're going to move to Matt. We're going to move to Matt. Okay, thank you both. That was really illuminating. Thank you both for that. Anthony's just said the Benyon report is really bold with what it wants to do, but the Benyon report's been very specific. 5 pilot sites is the minimum. We're doing 4, so we're not really matching that with action. You need additional funding, Matt. How much funding does IFCA need? I mean, what is the gap that we're talking for to do a proper job that you would be comfortable with?
Yeah, I mean, it's great that we're talking funding, and I know that we're public service, so we compete with all the other local authority public services that we're doing, because that's what we are. But we're currently on a budget of $750,000, which sounds a lot, but it doesn't get a great deal further than when you're operating at sea. We only use small vessels because we use technology to do most of our monitoring. But DEFRA's own report said that we should have, back in 2010, 23 officers. We've got a team of 11. There is great disparity between the different IFCAs in terms of their funding. The third biggest IFCA has got £1 million more than us. So we're still talking relatively small amounts. I mean, heard that Anthony, and it's great that he's supportive of us getting more funding. And I think it's really good that there's that realization that we can only do as much as we can. But when we talked about that 100 million for the sort of innovation and technologies, that's a huge amount of money. We only need a tiny little bit of that, and would make a big difference in terms of the work that we're doing. And we're working already with one of Martin's members of the PO in terms of exploring how technology can be beneficial to us monitoring and giving confidence to everybody that these sites are being protected, but also at the same time using technology to change the ways that we're working. So if I can use the example, at the moment, we try to restrict the amount of effort inside on the scallop beds. So we only allow a maximum of 6 dredges aside when they fish inside. Outside, they can go up to 18 on the big boats further off. But what we also do at the moment is because technology hadn't been there, we would restrict the size of the pole that they could use as well to hang these dredges off. So what happens now is that if a vessel is at sea and is fishing outside with more dredges, they have to come in, take the dredges off, but also put a different pole on. That's all wasted, steaming time, burning carbon, all the rest of it. With cameras on there, we can actually see how many dredges are on there. They can see what's happening on them. That means that the fisher benefits, we benefit as well. And it's just a very simple example of where technology is there now it's already in so many other businesses, and it's just fisheries is always so far behind the curve. I mean, we're working with companies with the software, etc., for this trial, that they're saying this happened in the haulage industry 10, 15 years ago. And it seems that the disconnect between the level of and speed at which technology is being brought in for the monitoring and management of the fishing fleet compared to the amount of technology that the fishing industry has brought in order to find and capture the fish. We need to get that balance better. But the one thing that we don't have, which private business has, is the funding to accelerate that that sort of innovation. What I must say, though, is that we are on the brink at a national level of bringing vessel monitoring in for all English vessels. So, and that's really, really important as long as it's funded properly, because of the we talked about being data deficient. We so are. And this is a great way of using technology to start informing that debate of what happens. I mean, we've been involved with the highly protected marine area on a displacement model, because everything you do has a reaction and it may be unintended consequences. Highly protected marine areas displace all fishing. So, but where does that fishing effort go? We've been doing, and we've just submitted our...
I need you to wrap up because I need to move on, sorry.
But we've just submitted it to show that it's not straightforward, because you're displacing all that effort. And it may be that they're now fishing on less productive grounds, so they have to put more effort in to get the same return. So although it sounds good that highly protected marine areas are the way forward, it in itself causes problems that we're having to look at as well.
Okay, thank you, Matt. So basically, there's a great action for Anthony. You get more funding, then Martin gets the data that he needs, so that then they can be more accurate and understand the status of the stocks. Peter, I'd love to come to you really about in the chat. There's been lots of information, lots of discussion around carbon and carbon being disturbed through beam trawling and bottom trawling. Is that correct?
To an extent it is, but I think it's possibly been overestimated there. I mean, that's not sort of an area that I specialize in, I should add. So I only speak from what I've read really on this. I don't work directly on that, but I think that, I mean, where I come from with respect to anything that damages the seabed is that, as was just mentioned, I think by Matt, is that really you mustn't keep doing it. You've got to rotate, you've got to allow the seabed to recover properly. And therefore, you should do this in a very careful manner and not sort of overexploit that area, whether it's scallop dredging or whether it's sort of some form of bottom trawling there. I think that's really important. But in terms of the overall carbon cycle, I think that it's some of the stuff that's been published relatively recently is difficult to actually justify some of the figures there if you examine them critically there. But as I said, that's not entirely my expertise, really. There are a few things that were raised that I wouldn't mind just mentioning. Firstly, there are two projects I'm doing for the European Commission at the moment. One is mapping fishing effort to look at, to develop risk maps for, in terms of, again, it's really more related to those animals that get caught in fishing gear. Because for many of the marine animals, particularly from sharks, turtles, seabirds, and whales and dolphins and seals and so on, actual bycatch is the greatest single problem that they face. That's what's causing more mortality than anything else, any other pressure. And yet it's very hard to determine this because of the difficulty of monitoring fishing effort and doing it by gear type. We've done this as far as we can using both the vessel monitoring system, VMS, and also AIS, automatic identification system, which is available sort of freely, but neither of those adequately monitor small vessels. So all the small vessels that are operating, and we have increasingly been moving towards a greater number of smaller vessels because it's more cost effective, but they're not being well monitored. So we don't have a good idea of their direct impacts. And so we badly need to do that. The other project that I'm doing for the European Commission is actually looking throughout Europe under the Habitats Directive at and that includes the UK, at how effective those marine protected areas are in terms of maintaining biodiversity. And I'm afraid in most cases they're not effective, and they're not effective for all sorts of reasons. One reason is because there's not enough funding to properly research those protected areas to actually determine whether the populations of the animals that are being that those were set up for are in fact being conserved. Are they at favorable conservation status, which is what they should be? And in some cases where they are monitored, they're not at favorable conservation status. And the trends that you see are unrelated to any human intervention, human management that's taking place in many cases. So we're not really managing our protected areas adequately.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you. Thank you. Right, I would like to move on. Oh, you've got your hand up, Mike.
Well,
you go ahead.
I need to come in. I need to come in here actually just pick up on what Peter was saying, because I think he slightly understated it. I mean, in actual fact, 97% of the, I think 342 MPAs that are around currently actually have fishing in them. It's quite legal at the moment for super trawlers to go into MPAs, which is happening. There is hardly any enforcement. Professor Callum Roberts, who was the principal advisor to the Benyon report, has come out and said they are paper parks, they are useless, they are doing nothing. In actual fact, you've got Greenpeace, you have the Marine Conservation Society, you have the head of the Wildlife Trust coming out very recently and saying unequivocally that bottom trawling should be banned, simple as. They're saying that it's absolutely unequivocal what is happening to the seabed. So demersal trawling is actually trashing the benthic environment. It takes 4 to 5 years for anything to grow back to anything like it was. So I mean, hear what Matt was saying about the management of scallop dredgers, but in actual fact, there is no justification for people to go out and actually dredge the seabed with chains and all the rest of it to disturb scallops and destroy 100-year-old sea fans. In actual fact, it's a very lucrative product. I get that, but there is such a thing as diver caught scallops. That is sustainable from what I can see. So I would say, as an Ocean Rebellion activist, the scallop dredging needs to be banned. There's lots of people calling for that. That's as simple as that. I mean, so it's all well and good for Martin to talk about keep concentrate on the carbon, blue carbon picture, but he's not mentioning about the fact that actually these boats are operating out of our local ports. I know Brixham's a very profitable port. It is probably the most profitable fishing port in the country. I get that, but it also has a sizable fleet of scallopers and beam trawlers. So I mean, I completely agree with a lot of what Gita said. I mean, perhaps in the labelling of fish and seafood, maybe it should be on there, the method of capture, and maybe it should be clearly labelled that this fish was caught by beam trawling or demersal trawling. So there is no enforcement of MPAs. They are effectively not monitored hardly at all. So, if you want to check out what Callum Roberts is saying, or the Marine Conservation Society is saying, Dr. Solan has done lots of work on that, then go and check it out. Not just listen to me, go and check it out.
Thank you.
Sorry, I needed to say that.
Absolutely. Martin, I mean, has there been any discussion within the industry and with government around the phasing out of beam trawling or reduction of beam trawling? Because the beam trawling fleet is very large.
A few points I'd like to make. It's a really healthy debate, so it's good to be part of. It seems like as a country we're really coming to an awakening about our environment. So I spent my summer holiday, went up to Sussex to the rewilding project at NEP, and it's absolutely fascinating. It's brilliant. The biodiversity's exploded, but it's not an environment without human intervention. I think we have to accept we're an industrialized country, and you can't just abandon a habitat. There is some form of management that tends to happen, and equally we're becoming much more conscious of our marine environments, which is great. So yes, there's a role for highly protected marine areas. The rollout of marine protected areas in the UK has been slow, in my opinion,
and they're fished, to be fair.
Well, it's an interesting point, isn't it? Because if the designated feature of a specific site is something like a bottom orientated species like a sea fan or a reef, then actually there is a logic in my mind that you could fish in the pelagic zone near the surface for species that has no interaction with the seabed. I would agree it wouldn't be reasonable if it's a reef to be dragging mobile gear over a reef, but there can be nuance to it. So yes, and things like spillover effects from MPAs are well proven in terms of fish stocks. No argument with that. So well managed MPAs will be in everyone's interest, just like well managed nature reserves on land are. So we're absolutely not against that at all.
Do we need more no-take zones?
Yeah, well, the highly protected marine areas will effectively be no-take zones. And I think they're going to be absolutely fascinating. I went on holiday to California a few years ago, and there's just a very small protected marine area in a place called La Jolla, which it was just unbelievable. There were people snorkeling, kayaking. The recreational benefits of protecting a relatively small area right next to the coast, next to a densely populated zone, were actually brilliant, just like a park on land. Everybody loves having a park in their neighborhood. So yeah, we're all for interventions like that.
It does feel, sorry, Geeky, go ahead.
Did you not ask about beam trawling, not marine reserves? I think we, because then we start considering beam trawling to an
extent.
Tried to come back directly to the question. I hadn't spoken for a little while, so I wanted to cover a couple of things. Hope that's okay. No, there's been no talk with the government about banning of bottom trawling. We're not aware of any initiative in that direction. Although I think Boris had a slip of the tongue recently in a school interview. I don't know if anyone saw that, where he said he was going to ban scallop dredging, but I don't think he'd read his own policy on that one.
Maybe he should follow through. That'd be good.
We're not expecting that to come. What we are expecting to do is work hard, just like farmers on land, to minimise our impact, respect protected areas, reduce the carbon intensity, manage fish stock sustainably. We are expecting to do all of that, but we're not expecting to not be able to trawl in zones that aren't protected from trawling for specific reasons.
Beam trawling releases more carbon, which we haven't covered, than the aviation industry. So how is continuing to trawl going to be fishing better, protecting the environment better?
So the Sala paper that referenced that beam trawling releases more carbon than aviation is hotly contested. We're at a very early stage of blue carbon research, and in my mind, good researchers are standing on the shoulders of giants. They're building on the research that's gone before them. This is effectively ground zero. This is the equivalent of pre-Charles Darwin, Lamarck saying, "Oh, giraffes have long necks because they stretch up, and that gives them long necks."
No, I think it was 36 marine scientists who backed up that information. I don't think this is guesswork. It's fairly serious work. And if there is a risk that we are releasing that much carbon, we need to stop right now, because we're on the brink of a climate catastrophe. I mean, we can't sit and wait and guess anymore. We have to pause it and say, damn, this fishing method is gutting to lose, but we're going to have to lose it. In the same way that businesses are going under all over Britain, because this government took its enormously brave step as taking us through Brexit, and it has been massively detrimental to lots of people. They were willing to take that risk, so we need to take this risk on every environmental issue possible right now, and that means stopping all beam trawling.
Yeah, we're absolutely putting our money where our mouth is. We're funding a 2-year research project with Bangor University to look into blue carbon. So that's with a chap called Jan Hiddink, who works alongside Dr. Evans. So we are recognising we have
just need to stop until we know otherwise.
Well, I disagree, but I respect your opinion.
Can I just say that Martin just mentioned the kelp project off Sussex, which indeed is a great project. But I don't know if you know, but off the Sussex coast, there were huge areas of kelp forest, which has actually been reduced to a very small fragment. And there's only one reason for that. That is because of fishing, of bottom fishing. It actually just basically destroyed the kelp forest. And that is why, as Martin was saying, that is why there is this project ongoing at the moment to reintroduce the kelp forest. You know, that's another great example. You mentioned just now, actually, Jim, about no-take zones. A fantastic example is usually well cited is the Lundy no-take zone, which has been well studied, and it's just remarkable what's happened there. And also like the Lyme Bay project, where the MPA was set up there. There was initially a lot of opposition from the fishing community there, but they absolutely embraced it. And that's because it was very much a collaborative exercise, and there's now great benefits to the fishers and there's great benefits to the environment. So it's absolutely clear that every time fishing is stopped in a certain area, it recovers. It generally recovers. Most of the time it recovers. So it's absolutely unequivocal, you know, that bottom fishing is destroying benthic environments. I mean, it's pretty obvious to most people. If you drag a huge piece of equipment over a vulnerable, sensitive seabed, it will destroy it. I mean, please just go and look at the Marine Conservation Society report that has just come out. Please go and check it out, everybody listening to this tonight.
Thank you, Mike. I mean, the chat's alive really with all sorts of comments. It's all blah blah blah, heartbreaking. We celebrate a postage stamp of conservation whilst devastating a massive area. You know, there's this sort of overwhelming feeling that we're way behind the curve on this. That there's a lot of future thinking, and we will be doing this, we will be doing that. That things are, you know, no-take zones in America, but actually, what's going on here, Peter? Are we really behind the curve? Is that the reality? How much time have we got to play around with this one?
I think we are very much behind the curve. I think I just don't think humans are intelligent enough to actually to respond adequately, and we're always so slow in everything. We were very slow with responding to deforestation. We still haven't really done so, and we're so slow in the marine environment. Really, we are. And people aren't taking it seriously enough. They're not going out and doing things that they could be doing, really. There's a number of actions that could be taken that aren't necessarily very expensive, but would be sort of sensible ones and would help a lot. And we're not doing that. There's also an awful lot of misinformation going around and unevidence-based stuff, which I think is counterproductive.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Anthony, I mean, so, you know, dredging, bottom trawling is clearly highlighted in that Benyon report that we've been discussing as damaging. It describes it as damaging. You know, you went out on a beam trawler for 48 hours. You didn't mention sustainability once. Was it because you were worried about using the word, or because it didn't feel very important at the time?
Not really. I mean, it wasn't a case of me not mentioning sustainability. It was just a fact-finding mission for me on a weekend. But I enjoyed your article on it, albeit rather critical. I have to say, I mean, I think a lot like ploughing. I mean, I think ploughing is one of the most dangerous things we can do to our land. And that's one of the things why I support regenerative agriculture. You know, there's been a seismic mood shift around regen. It's not impossible to imagine in the future for there to be a seismic shift around beam trawlers and how they catch their fish. I'm just I'm really conscious of the fact that we have coastal communities here that depend on the fishing industry. We need to see them succeed and thrive, because without them, our towns become shelled out hollow villages or towns, of which they just become tourist destinations. So there is finding a balance. And I think it was really striking to hear someone say to me a few weeks ago about finding that right balance between the fact there is always a little bit of a trade-off. And we have to find that gap. And I think when we talk about the technology, as others have on this call, and we talk about being behind the curve, I think it's absolutely right that Dr. Evans said we're always behind the curve. He's completely right. Humanity is usually behind the curve until the crisis smacks us in the face. But we have to look at the new technology. We have to look at the investment. We have to be able to encourage people to be able to fish in a sustainable way, because it's arguably in all of their interests to do so. So yeah, I mean, I think we can do a lot more, but sustainability has to be top of it. And it was, key in the Fisheries Act, which I spent a great deal of time talking on, where I mentioned sustainability a lot of the time.
So, I mean, you out of all of us are in a prime position to be able to advance this. What are going to, moving from this talk, we've had 80 people participating online. There's a huge weight of feeling around, the very obvious fact that we do want our industries and our local businesses to thrive, but that can't be at the expense of complete marine collapse. And we're behind the curve, as you said. What are you going to take then to your colleagues, and how are you going to move this forward on your constituents' behalf?
Well, I mean, firstly, I already engaged with a number of people on this call. I mean, notably Martin and Matt, about where we can go and what we can do. But this isn't just one MP on their own. I'm dealing with the aquaculture sector a great deal as well, and we've talked about kelp. We've talked about how we can use the seas to help sequester more carbon. Well, I'm particularly interested in Lyme Bay. We've got the largest live bivalve mollusk farm, think now in Europe, soon to be in the world. And there's a huge opportunity for us to do more of that, use the seas to our advantage to tackle climate change. So, my takeaways from this, and it has been a fantastic conversation, a fantastic and lively debate. And I think it's important that we do look at the things that have been raised, whether it's supply chains, which I think is hugely important for where we go and how we source and sustain our food, but also those labeling issues, to the technology that's being provided. I mean, the other thing that Matt has repeatedly made this point about is funding. And we're not going to be able to have a success around the marine protected areas and the highly protected marine areas unless we've got the funding to be able to monitor them. We really have to double down on that. And that's something I'm already working on with a number of other coastal MPs, because we know it's in our advantage. We know it's better for us to be able to monitor those waters and to be able to give the data to people like Dr. Evans to actually use and to be able to write reports, yes, in the future, but also to look at the real-time information that's coming in. There are some success stories about how certain fish stocks have become replenished, but there is obviously, clearly, as ever, always more that can be done. Otherwise, if there was nothing to be done, I wouldn't have a job and no one would be doing politics at all.
Thank you, Anthony. Okay, so what we're going to do is we've reached the time where we're going to launch our poll. You panelists will not be able to see the poll, but I will read it out to you. Massimo is going to launch the poll, and if our viewers could complete that poll as quickly as possible. So the poll's question is, how do you feel about the state of our oceans and fisheries? Please answer 1. Okay, so an option is, I think fish stocks are at sustainable levels and little needs to change. Another option is, I think fish stocks are not currently sustainable and fishing methods and protections need to change. Another option is, I think fish stocks are not currently sustainable and fishing methods and protections need to change. And I think we need clear government action to support the fishing industry in this. And then the last response is, I think our whole marine environment is in crisis and demand immediate action. There is not enough action from government to enable the fishing industry to address the environmental marine crisis. And we'll see what the responses are there. Whilst that's completing, we've had a very involved and very enlightening discussion as always, and we all agree that we want flourishing local industries, but the reality is that the environment crisis is hitting the oceans hard, as it's hitting it as hard as hitting land, and swift change and adaptation to ensure a flourishing marine system is paramount. So to end on a positive note, I'd just like to go round the panel and ask what for you would be the biggest, most immediate change that you could put in place to make fishing climate smart or sustainable. Okay, so one immediate change that you could put in place, or you would like to see put in place to make fishing climate smart and sustainable.
Great.
Okay, how are we doing on the poll before we go around we've still got 22% to fill in the poll. It's creeping up. Okay, well, I think we're pretty much there. Should we share it, Massimo? Okay, so 86% of people were very clear. I think our whole marine environment is in crisis and demand immediate action. There is not enough action from government to enable the fishing industry to address the environmental marine crisis. So I guess that's keying back into calls from Matt and the inshore fisheries to get more funding, to be able to provide that data so that then fishing industry can be more precise and have greater knowledge of what those stocks are like. And then people like Peter Evans can also be much more aware of the state of our fisheries and oceans. Okay, so we will start with you, Peter. So to end on our positive note, what for you would be the biggest and most immediate change that you would like to put in place or could be put in place on your behalf to make fishing sustainable?
This might sound like a strange thing to say, but I think we need to stop working in a nationalist manner. We need to recognize that the resources out there are common to all nations. They move around and cross national boundaries. So we have to work very closely together with all the other countries that are overlapping in the areas that that we may be fishing in, and we of course overlap in our fishing in their sort of economic EEZs. And so I think really proper international collaboration and understanding of each other's needs and constraints and so on is really important.
Thank you, Peter. Matt.
We missed our chance in the Fisheries Act, but I think there will be an expectation. We use technology far more than we do at the moment, and remote electronic monitoring has to come to the fore so that we can understand much more about what's happening with our fishing industry and using that data to make it better in the future.
When you say we missed our chance, what do you mean?
Well, it was considered that it was going to be part of the Fisheries Act as well, that technology and remote electronic monitoring was going to be very much there, and it was in debate, and it was withdrawn at the last minute, which is unfortunate. But I think ultimately the work that we're doing and other organisations are doing will demonstrate the need for that technology if we're serious about getting to anywhere near world-class fisheries management. We're not going to do it without technology being at the forefront of that change in how we approach our fisheries management in the future, in my opinion.
And that technology monitoring was something that you were really talking about in depth earlier on. Anthony, what would be the big thing that you could put in place?
It's more the approach and attitude. So it would be regenerative fishing. I go back to the point that Dr. Evans made earlier. We have to think very carefully about how and where our fishing fleets are fishing and the length of time in which they're doing it. And I think if you can take the same approach to agriculture and the way in which people have moved to regen and to organic, and to even to wilding, as was mentioned regarding net, you can do the same in fishing. It is possible, and it does require, as has just been said, this point about joined up thinking. fish move, as someone reminded me the other day. And so therefore what the French do, what the Europeans do, we have to find some commonality about, approaching it in the same way. And I'm not nuanced enough to give a good enough reference to it, but I've been doing quite a lot of reading around what the Canadians have done. And actually their marine protected areas have been really quite instrumental in seeing the regrowth of a number of species, not also including lobster and crab, to a really, really healthy level. So there are some positive examples that we can take lead on.
Thank you, Anthony. And Mike.
Yeah, well, it's very simple. I think we all of us on this planet need to kind of rethink our attitudes towards the oceans and the life within. And as Sylvia Earle said, we have to get away from this idea that because it's out there, we go and catch it. And in terms of what we discussed tonight, quite simply for me, we need proper marine protected areas. We need enforcement. We need to stop destructive methods of fishing, i.e. anything that's destroying the benthic environment. And just echoing entirely what Peter said, there has to be international agreement. And the world has struggled with trying to protect the oceans at an international level for many, many decades, but we're no closer to it, unfortunately. But my hope and dream would be that we have to have international planning and agreement to protect the sensitive environments globally. That's all I can hope at this point in time. So that's all I can say.
Thank you. Geeti.
Well, we need to eat more mussels, basically. Farmed mussels, not wild mussels, because wild mussels are there on our shores, cleaning the pollution that is being pumped into our rivers by, given permission by our government. So mussels, farm mussels create marine reserves. They have no input. They're straightforward to harvest and incredibly good for you. And the shells capture carbon. I mean, they are just our solution. And so we eat a lot of mussels in the pub. But I have noticed people talking about not eating fish at all. And we do, we're talking about rewilding. We have limited land to produce food on. We cannot stop eating fish altogether and rewild half the country and produce our energy from our land as well as our food. It's just not possible. So we've got to bloody manage our oceans. We've got to do it really well. We've got to protect them for the amount of carbon that they capture and the carbon that they can release. And this is really urgent. So eat a lot of mussels from mussel farms. And this government needs to pull its finger out and act like we are on the brink of a climate catastrophe right now, not 2 years, not a conversation, not some research. We have got the information, trust your instincts and act on it. And that's really exciting. That is a positive message.
Thank you, Geeti. And Martin.
I absolutely love mussels as well. So yeah, I'll echo that. Definitely eat more mussels. Obviously, this is an environmental debate, so understandable that we haven't covered a lot of the social aspect. But speaking to the fishermen who I'm here representing, they are massively passionate about making sure their children can come into the industry, their grandchildren can come in. So we do need to find this balance of still eating fish, as Geeti says, but doing it in a way which is much, much less carbon intensive and environmentally damaging. And that is the big challenge. That's why I wanted to come and engage today, because we are up for that challenge. And today's been really informative. I would say the one thing I'm looking for is that Anthony's government follows through on the 100 million, because there's a tranche of that 100 million funding, which is about research and innovation, about 24 million pounds. And we've come forward with 5 or 6 projects that we really want to take forward. Everything from changing gear to researching under research species like cuttlefish, crabs and lobsters, so we really know we're being sustainable in the exploitation. So let's make sure that 100 million gets spent on sensible things.
Environmental and social issues are exactly the same thing. You can't separate them. If we haven't got an environment, we have no social issues left.
Yeah, the environment.
I understand the economic issues of fishers. I do get it.
The environment.
We have to put the environment first.
yes, the environment looks after itself. It's the people's impact on the environment that has to be managed, if you like.
Exactly, yeah.
Well, yeah, okay. I think we're going to bring that to a close, and I'd just like to say thank you very much to our panel. I'm going to ask our panel to remain. What's going to happen now is that we're going to play out on a short video, and then audience, if we can say bye-bye to you. Thank you very, very much for being a part of this. You are absolutely integral to this. There's been so much going on this chat. Massimo in a minute is going to talk you through how you can save the chat, because there's huge amounts of important information there. There will be more Totnes talks coming up. There is one on the 6th of December I'm just going to talk to you about now. It's a live physical discussion and a simultaneous Zoom live stream from St. John's Church, Bridgetown. Reflections on the fallout from COP26 with Dan Lunt, Professor of Climate Science at Bristol University, who's a co-lead author of the 2021 IPCC, that's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report. And there'll also be Tom Rivett-Carnac, who's a political lobbyist for the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, who was a key mover for the 2015 Paris Climate Accord. And there are numerous other exciting panelists to be confirmed. It will be chaired by Rob Hopkins. It will be very exciting, very informative. So hopefully you can all be there, and panelists, you are all welcome to join us as well as part of that. So thank you very much. Massimo, do you want to explain how everybody can share this chat? Sorry, save this chat.
Thank you, Jim. So first of all, just want to make everybody aware that if you go to the website totnestalks.org, you will see slightly summarized recordings of all the talks that have happened. And for anybody who doesn't have a laptop or a computer, you may not be able to save the chat. By all means, direct message me now with your email address, and I will just send you the chat. For the rest of you, you just need to turn on the chat, and that's the button down at the bottom of your menu. And at the bottom, you'll see that you can send a message to everyone or to a particular person. If you move to the right, you'll see 3 quite faint dots. There you can click on Save Chat. The last thing to say about it is it will put it in your Documents folder, whether you're on a PC or a Mac. So go to your Documents folder, then look for Zoom, look for this meeting, and then you'll find the chat.
Okay, so I'd just like to say one final thank you very much for the panel. You are going to remain after the farewell to our audience, but the chat is full of thank yous, because it's so important to have these open, informed and honest discussions, you know, to hear from all sorts of different viewpoints. You know, we're all concerned by the environmental crisis. And so this is a massive thank you to you for giving up your Friday evening, you know, to interact with all of us. Thank you very much. I think Massimo is going to share his screen.